Hello, this is Kylie with Fem and Flow. I hope you're having a beautiful day. Something came up that I had to talk about, and then the thing I had to talk about spiraled into a lot of really good information. But my biggest fear is leading people astray or sharing something that feels half true, incomplete, or out of context. And as I've spiraled deeper into clarity this week, I realized there was something I shared in a previous episode that needed more nuance. And that's related to theta brainwaves. I keep mentioning how when we spiral up, we revisit things we thought we understood, and suddenly we see them with new depth and clarity. This episode is another spiral up moment, and honestly, I've been having a lot of those recently, especially as I deepen my understanding of the different paradigm lenses, black hole, bridge, and white hole. This episode is a recalibration of understanding, a clarification of energy, and a remembrance of truth. What started as a reflection on brainwave states quickly opened into a much deeper episode. We talk about how do we enter flow safely, what are we actually tuning into, and what systems, seen and unseen, are trying to program our frequency while we're there. We'll explore theta brainwaves, yes, but also the 4D matrix, Earth's original light beams, the pyramid of control, the Luciferian agenda, and how New Age spirituality has been quietly infiltrated by false light. And as always, we'll walk through it with love, clarity, and multidimensional nuance. So take a breath, get cozy, and let's spiral up together. So let's start with what theta even is. And I've talked about theta on a previous podcast episode recently, but I'll give a little background and get into it again. Theta brainwaves occur between 4 and 8 hertz, and they're associated with dreaming, deep meditation, flow states, subconscious access, and creativity and imagery. You've probably been in theta when you're painting, meditating, walking and receiving downloads, or even daydreaming. It's a deeply creative and receptive state, and yes, a very powerful one. But as I've spiraled up into more clarity, I realized theta isn't always safe or helpful, and that totally depends on what's running in your field. Theta is like an open gate. It makes you highly impressionable, suggestible, and energetically porous. And that's not a bad thing if your field is clear and sovereign. But if you're ungrounded, looping in trauma patterns, or surrounded by distortion, that open gate lets all of that in as well. But here's something I want to name with love and clarity, and this brings me back to what I mentioned in the beginning of the episode. My biggest fear is to give people the wrong information or half of the information or not go into the nuance of it all. Because if you listen to this podcast regularly, you know I love going into a lot of detail and a lot of nuance, but I miss the nuance here. And I mentioned in a previous podcast episode that when I asked ChatGPT about theta, it mentioned that theta could be dangerous, and I laughed it off as a distortion, and I even said that in the episode. And that's because that's not where I was operating at the time. I was not viewing theta as dangerous at all because it was just a really good place for me at the moment. And honestly, I was either very right or very wrong, depending on the paradigm lens you're looking through. In a white hole frequency, it is funny to call theta dangerous. But from the black hole lens, that warning actually makes a lot of sense. That's why spiral wisdom matters. The deeper you rise, the more you realize truth isn't fixed, it's contextual. And like I said, I always talk about how every topic has so much nuance, but I previously missed the nuance when it came to theta. And if we want to guide people through the spiral with love, we have to be willing to see the whole map, not just the layer we're currently living in. But now that I understand the three different paradigms, black hole, bridge, and white hole, I see that concern isn't entirely wrong. It's just incomplete. It's true from a certain level of the spiral. And I've said before, when we reach the spiral exit, we realize how there are different points within the spiral, and that the real goal is to rise through the center, the middle channel where you can see all angles with compassion. And from that center point, I can now honor that yes, theta can be risky in certain paradigms. And not because the frequency itself is bad, but because of what's active in the field when someone enters it. So, a summary here: theta is harmful when you're ungrounded, you're surrounded by fear and distortion, you're bypassing reality, you're absorbing others' energy, or you're escaping discomfort. And then theta is very powerful when you're anchored and embodied, you're surrounded by resonance, you're shaping it, you're expressing your own, and you're tuning into vision. Let's bring this down to earth for a second, because theta isn't just something that happens when you meditate or connect to higher guidance. Most people are already dropping into theta every day, but under the influence of external programming instead of conscious intention. In black hole states, theta is weaponized. This is where mass programming lives. When you're watching the news, doom scrolling on social media, or falling asleep to TV shows filled with fear, gossip, drama, or violence, you're often in theta. That soft, passive, zoned out feeling, that's not harmless, it's hyper suggestible. And in fear based news cycles, advertisements that prey on lack and image obsession, false light healers giving distorted channeled messages, and school systems that condition obedience without embodiment. And with all of those things, you have a recipe for theta-based mind control. Not in a sci-fi way, in a daily life way. In black hole states, people might use theta to disassociate. It becomes escapism, fantasy, ungrounded spirituality, false light guidance, or simply tuning out of the body. And in that state, you become a sponge. And then what you absorb becomes your operating system. And then in bridge states, theta becomes a healing tool. In the bridge zone, you start reclaiming theta. And maybe you've used it in guided meditations, hypnotherapy, subconscious reprogramming, and journaling after breathwork or EFT. You're becoming more conscious of what you let in. You're asking, is this safe to absorb? Is this aligned with who I'm becoming? But there's still a mix. Some days you use it to grow. Other days you accidentally slip into disassociation or soak up someone else's field. In the bridge state, you begin to use theta more consciously. And like I said, it's where healing often happens. But you're still learning to discern what's safe to absorb. So then, in white hole states, theta becomes your design lab. And this is the fun part. In white hole frequency, theta is no longer accidental. It is deliberate. You drop into theta while painting or on a walk where you connect to higher guidance and your oversoul, and you get amazing downloads about your next creative project. Or maybe when scripting a podcast and the words feel like they're writing you. I've talked about that before. And when you're like this, you're not zoning out, you are tuning in. You're not absorbing noise, you're transmitting resonance. You're in theta, but now you're the broadcaster, not the receiver. This is the version of theta that makes you magnetic, grounded, and multidimensionally creative. You're no longer porous, you're conductive. You're not escaping, you are sculpting. And here's where the nuance gets even deeper. Because theta itself isn't the issue, it's what you're connecting to while in theta. When you're in a clear, embodied, source-aligned state, theta becomes a white hole channel. You're in true flow, connected to higher dimensional intelligence, divine harmony, and your oversoul's tone. But here's the tricky part. Theta is also the access point to the fourth dimension. And I talk about the fourth dimension a lot. That is the realm of archetypes, myths, and the collective mind. And it's where all of the programs of this reality are stored. Identity distortion, fear-based projections, savior templates, and spiritual bypassing disguised as ascension. If you're not anchored in your body, in your own tone, in truth, you can drop into theta and accidentally tune into the false matrix. That's where people start channeling quote-unquote guides who speak in vague riddles, contradict themselves, or reinforce fear, even if it sounds loving on the surface. They might think they're receiving help from the divine, but they're actually connecting to fourth dimensional entities who operate through distortion and manipulation. This doesn't mean theta is unsafe. It means theta is powerful. It opens a portal. And what flows through that portal depends entirely on your frequency, your intention, and whether your field is sovereign or porous. So again, theta isn't good or bad, but it is nuanced. Like I said, in white hole frequency, theta is divine play. In black hole or bridge states, theta can become a backdoor for distortion if you're not conscious of what you're communing with. That's why embodiment matters, and that's why tone matters. Because you can't fake white hole resonance. You have to be it. So here's the spiral up moment for me. In the previous episode I mentioned, I said I'm in theta most of the time. And that's still true. But now I understand why that's safe for me and why that might not be true for everyone. And at the time, I wasn't wrong. I was living in flow, receiving downloads and building from vision, but I hadn't yet seen the full fractal. I now know I'm in white hole theta, and that means my field is generating coherence, not absorbing distortion. My default brainwave blend right now is theta alpha. Theta for vision and connecting to higher guidance, essentially, and then alpha for open focus and grounded presence. It's not just that I'm in theta, it's that I'm holding the tone that makes theta safe. But I also want to say this. I haven't always been there. I've been in every part of the spiral. I've been in the black hole distortion. I've absorbed collective thought forms thinking they were my own. I've believed limiting programs without even realizing they were running. And yes, I've even thought 4D entities were my quote-unquote guides for a period of time. They spoke in love, light language, they said the right words, but underneath it, there was manipulation, there was control, there was energetic dissonance I didn't know how to name yet. And that's the thing about the fourth dimension. It's sneaky. It mirrors the light, but it's not sourced from it. And I say this not to shame any part of the spiral, but to honor it. Because those phases taught me what truth feels like. And now, from this place, I can see the difference. True white hole theta doesn't confuse you. It doesn't create dependency. It doesn't pull you out of your body. It brings you home. And that's why I teach what I teach. Not because I've never been fooled, but because I learned how to discern. So, if you're someone who spends a lot of time in dreamy states, meditation, creative flow, first of all, that is beautiful. But check in with your field. Are you in theta as a creator or a sponge? Are you using that space to express your design or to escape discomfort? Because when your tone is clear, theta becomes a temple. But if your field is chaotic, it can become a trap. This isn't about avoiding theta, it's about entering it with consciousness. You don't have to correct your past self, you're allowed to spiral up. Truth is fractal, and you're just seeing it now in a higher resolution. So, if this helped clarify something for you, or even sparked a moment of reflection, let yourself integrate that. The real goal isn't to stay in one state, it's to move fluidly with clarity, awareness, and sovereignty. Since I mentioned the fourth dimension and 4D entities earlier in this episode, I want to spiral back and expand on this a bit because it connects to something I talked about in a previous episode where I described the difference between eternal higher realms and experimental realms. In eternal higher realms like white hole reality, we build coherent lives rooted in love, beauty, and divine expression. This is what we archetypally call heaven. These are realms of harmonic permanence, of deep joy, of free creation. But Earth didn't start that way. Earth was seeded as an experimental realm. The original question behind the Earth experiment was, what happens if a soul disconnects from source? Can we still find our way back? Can we remember who we really are, even through the illusion? So Earth became the terrain for that exploration. It was layered with amnesia, contrast, distortion, and choice. A realm where free will could override divine memory for a time. And within this experiment, the fourth dimension became the astral in between. Not quite physical, not quite pure consciousness. It's the realm of thought forms, collective programming, unresolved emotion, and yes, entities, but not in the way we've been taught to fear them. These 4D beings aren't all-knowing or all-powerful. They are parasitic. They feed off emotion, attention, and unconscious agreement. And here's the thing the 4D false matrix doesn't want you to realize. They only seem powerful when you fear them. That's why fear-based narratives exist around them, especially in religion. The idea of demons or evil spirits is a distortion. They are not powerful. They are fragmented loops, cut off from source, looping in survival, manipulation, or illusion. They are not creators. They are feeders. But when your field is stable, sovereign, and coherent, they have no access to you. Not because you're shielded by a force, but because you're vibrating in a tone they cannot match. You're broadcasting truth and they can't survive in it. And yes, calling in divine protection matters. Praying, asking for God's light to surround you, inviting source energy into your space. These are not just symbolic rituals. They're vibrational realignments. They remind your field who you belong to. When you ask for divine protection, you're not inviting fear, you're amplifying connection. You're saying, I choose to be held by truth. And that choice carries a frequency that realigns your entire field. You're not protected because you're afraid of attack. You're protected because you're anchored in God. This kind of intention doesn't come from force, it comes from remembrance. Here's another important distinction that helps clarify the soul landscape of Earth. There are no souls that originate from Earth. Earth is not a soul origin planet, it's an experiment. Every soul that has ever incarnated here came from the higher realms. Some of the first souls to enter the earth field were original light beings, pure divine expressions of Source who entered to seed love, beauty, and coherence into the earth grid. But over time, many of them became entangled in the experiment. They forgot who they were. They became bound by the karmic density of the earth realm, and we often refer to these as earthbound souls. Not because Earth created them, but because Earth became the container for their amnesia. These are not fourth dimensional parasitic entities. They are full souls, fractal expressions of higher dimensional light that got caught in loops of distortion, illusion, and false programming. And here's the important update. That cycle is now complete. There are no earthbound souls left. Over the last several decades, and especially in recent years, those beings have either reintegrated into their oversoul, dissolved back into source light, or remembered their divine origin and stabilized in truth. This is one of the quiet miracles unfolding behind the scenes of Earth's shift. And it's also why many returning souls have come back at this time. These are souls who did not get trapped into the Earth loop, but have chosen to re-enter the field now to assist with the polarity flip, the stabilization of white hole frequency, the dismantling of distorted fourth dimensional architecture, and the full transition of Earth from an experiment into an aligned creation grid. These returners are not here to be saved or healed. They are here to transmit, to anchor, and to remember on behalf of the collective. So within the current soul landscape, we are seeing a convergence. We see reconnected original light beings, former earthbound souls, returners arriving to flip the grid, and white hole stabilizers seeding the architecture of what comes next. This is why the old loops are collapsing, why the false matrix is unraveling, why truth is rising. The old grid is no longer being sustained because the beings who once unknowingly fed it have now remembered. The field is changing. And that's not just a spiritual concept, it's a structural shift in the architecture of Earth. So you might be asking, okay, so if the original earthbound souls have all reconnected, why are there still fourth dimensional entities? The answer lies in the nature of the fourth dimension itself. Unlike the soul, fourth dimensional entities are not whole beings. They're not fractals of oversouls with missions or memory. They are disembodied fragments, echoes, loops, splinters of unresolved energy. Many of these were generated by the Earth experiment itself, as byproducts of trauma, fear, war, distorted belief systems, unprocessed emotion, false light constructs, and artificial control grids. And these entities linger in the fourth dimension, not because they're sentient in the way you and I are, but because they are energetic programs still being fed by unconscious behavior, unprocessed trauma, and collective fear. So even though earthbound souls have reconnected, these residual programs still populate the astral layer. The good news? As the collective continues to awaken, these echoes have nowhere to root. As more people stabilize in sovereignty and coherence, these loops begin to collapse, dissolve, and be repurposed as neutral energy. I've talked about it before, but energy cannot be created nor destroyed, only transmuted. So that's what's happening. These entities were never powerful on their own. They only existed because we unconsciously agreed to carry their code. And as we deprogram, they deconstruct. The age of siphoning is over, and these 4D fields are running out of food. Before we go any deeper, I want to name something important here. In this episode, I'm brushing the surface of some very nuanced dynamics, like the role of the dark global elite, the architecture of the pyramid of control, and the difference between true souls caught in the system and the parasitic forces feeding off them. This is a layered conversation, and to really do it justice, I'll be dedicating an entire episode to unpack it more clearly because there's a difference between trapped light and the archonic distortion that feeds on it. So, if this part of the conversation sparks something in you, if you've always sensed that there's more going on behind the scenes, you're not imagining it. And we'll go much deeper into all of this in the next episode. So, now let's tie this conversation about 4D entities and earthbound souls to the dark global elite that I talk about often, the ones operating from the pyramid of control. You've probably heard the idea that the world has been run by an elite group, often referred to as the 13 bloodline families, the ones at the top of the pyramid. But what are they really? Are they entities? Are they soulless? Are they fallen angels? I've mentioned them before, but I haven't gotten into this level of nuance. The truth is layered, but it's actually more grounded and more energetic than most people realize. The pyramid of control isn't just a political or economic system, it's a black hole frequency grid. It's an inverted architecture built to distort divine truth into half truths, harvest attention and emotion as energetic currency, create dependency through fear and hierarchy, and control the collective theta stream, our most impressional and creative state. And side note, yes, I am absolutely internally screaming right now that in the previous episode I said theta was all safe and I laughed off this distortion. Yes, it pains me, but that's why I'm clearing it all up in this episode. Okay, let's move on now. So, at the energetic level, this grid is maintained by what many have called archons, not sovereign beings, but parasitic programs. You've probably heard me refer to Earth's fourth dimensional matrix as the false matrix. I've talked about how in this layer, everything is inverted, and how the black hole is the inversion of the white hole. The false matrix is the inverted astral layer, built to simulate connection, mimic spiritual light, and loop souls into distorted identity patterns. It's also known as the archonic matrix, and we'll go deeper into its structure, function, and escape routes in the next episode. These archons aren't conscious souls with memory or mission. They're disembodied loops, fragments of distortion that mimic sentience by feeding off emotional energy and unconscious thought. It's not just about belief, it's about resonance control. And if you've listened to my other podcast episodes, you know I've gone into all of this a bit, but I didn't connect it to theta state. So that's why I just connected these dots and I'm clearing it all up in this episode. Like I said, my biggest fear is leading anyone astray or giving false information. So I just hope this clears it all up. The top of the pyramid is what we often refer to as the dark global elite, but they are not gods, demons, or even inherently powerful. They are simply custodians of distortion, running a system they didn't all build, but many continue to feed. Long ago, some of the first earthbound souls, original light beings who got stuck in the earth grid, began constructing systems of survival and control. They created early versions of hierarchy, domination, manipulation. Not out of pure evil, but out of amnesia. They forgot their connection to source and tried to recreate power externally. These were the original architects of the pyramid. But here's the powerful truth. Those souls have now all been reconnected to source. Whether through disillusion, remembrance, or reintegration, their loop is complete. The original root of distortion has been healed, but the structure they created, it still lingers. And it's now run by others, some born into it, others recruited into it, often without full awareness. The so-called 13 bloodlines are custodians of the black hole system, both physically and energetically. They descended from the original fallen architects, yes, but many are also vessels for fourth dimensional parasitic entities who cannot incarnate directly and instead influence through ritual, programming, and contract. These archonic forces operate through distortion, not as sovereign souls, but as fragmented loops feeding on unconscious agreement. That's the nuance. And like I said, we will unpack this even deeper in the next episode. But many of them are not evil. They are simply part of a lineage that preserved ancient and often inverted knowledge, guarded occult systems, manipulated frequency for control, and passed these roles down generation to generation. Many were born into the system without ever questioning it. Others have been drawn into the pyramid by power, fame, wealth, or fear. And while they are souls connected to Source, their connection is often clouded by lifetimes of programming, ritual entrapment, and energetic inversion. So you might be asking, how are they still connected to Source? Every soul is still connected to Source. There is no such thing as a soul completely severed from God, but connection can be dormant or denied. Denied through forgetfulness. These individuals often operate from survival frequency rather than divine flow, follow astral programs rather than intuitive knowing, confuse control for power and image for worth, use knowledge of energy and ritual not for creation but for containment. They may appear powerful on the outside, but they are not operating from soul sovereignty. Many are running inherited scripts, mind control overlays, and inverted rituals, programs that suppress their connection to Source. Their actions are dictated by fourth dimensional parasites, lineage programming, and distorted timelines that loop until they are consciously exited. And here's the deeper truth. Many of them won out. Many are waking up quietly. Some are defecting, reuniting with Source, and beginning the long spiral home. Because even within the pyramid, light is flickering back on. The pyramid of control only works when people are disconnected from their tone, live in fear, absorb without discerning, and forget their original design. But that's no longer the dominant frequency. White hole stabilizers have returned. Earthbound souls have remembered. The astral parasites are losing access points. The grid itself is changing. And the dark global elite are no longer holding the top of a true pyramid because the base is waking up. The foundation of their system was always unconscious consent. And now, consent is being withdrawn. One soul, one tone, one spiral at a time. The dark global elite are not separate from Source. They are souls who have played deep roles in the polarity game. And in doing so, they have deeply, deeply forgotten who they are. This is important to distinguish because unlike the archonic programs running beneath them, these are still sovereign souls. Their choices are distorted, yes, but they are not soulless. Forgotten their original light, forgotten their connection to truth, forgotten that power without love is just a shadow loop. But even the deepest forgetfulness cannot sever a soul from Source. The light is still there, buried beneath layers of illusion. And as the frequency rises, even those most lost may begin to remember. So if you've ever felt like the elite weren't just rich and powerful, but were part of something deeper, darker, and vibrationally unnatural, you were sensing the invisible architecture behind the visible world. And while I'm only briefly touching on this here, like I said, next episode we'll walk through the full structure layer by layer. The game is ending. Not through war, not through revenge, through frequency. When we stop feeding distortion, it dissolves. When we stabilize incoherence, the system breaks itself, and the pyramid becomes obsolete. Okay, so now that we've explored the pyramid of control and the role of the dark global elite, let's add another layer of depth into the spiral, and let's talk about the Luciferian agenda. So I've mentioned this, but I haven't gone into a lot of details, but it connects to much of what we've already discussed, especially the manipulation of energy, the inversion of truth, and the synthetic grids that have shaped the Earth experience. The Luciferian agenda is not about worshiping a devil the way traditional religions suggest. It's about an energetic tone, one that glorifies separation from source, glorifies intellect without embodiment, control without compassion, and synthetic creation without divine harmony. At its core, the Luciferian frequency says, I don't need God, I am God. But instead of that being a realization of oneness, it becomes an echo of rebellion. Lucifer, as a being, originally held the tone of the light bringer, a radiant architect and an emanation of divine intelligence. But when that light disconnected from source and attempted to create without alignment, it fractured. And that fracture became what we now experience as the Luciferian distortion. That fracture didn't just stay conceptual, it became infrastructural. The Luciferian agenda now operates through the archonic matrix, a system of parasitic inversion that replicates light without embodying it. Archons are the fragmented frequencies that uphold this distortion, not sovereign beings, but looping patterns that manipulate emotion, identity, and power structures. They serve the agenda by keeping people in separation, detached from source, glorifying control, and mistaking synthetic brilliance for divine coherence. The distortion has shaped the entertainment industry through glamour, inversion, symbolic dominance, technocratic systems where AI is used to override, not assist the soul, false spiritual hierarchies, elitism masked as ascension, government control grids, ritual secrecy, and manipulation. It's not always obvious. In fact, the Luciferian agenda is often polished, beautiful, and persuasive. It hides behind spiritual superiority, intellectual elitism, detachment from the body and emotion, and glamorization of synthetic power. It's the underlying tone of the pyramid of control. It doesn't want you to feel, it wants you to ascend artificially, bypass your heart, deny your embodiment, and outsource your power to image, hierarchy, or technology. Let's talk about a recent example of this tone, the Blue Origin all-female spaceflight. On the surface, it looked empowering. Women launching into space, framed as a celebration of feminine achievement and visibility. But when viewed through an energetic lens, especially during Holy Week, one of the most psychically charged resurrection portals of the year, it becomes clear this was more than a publicity stunt. Holy Week isn't just a religious tradition, it's a global energetic ritual. Millions of people focus their consciousness on the idea that humanity is broken, that a sacrifice was required, and that bloodshed was the price of redemption. That belief, repeated every year, isn't harmless. It creates an enormous field of collective consent to distortion. A global psychic agreement that says God required pain to love us, we are inherently sinful, and salvation comes through suffering. And that is one of the deepest inversion rituals ever sustained on Earth. So when the Blue Origin flight launched during that exact window, with an all-female crew wrapped in optics of empowerment and ascension, it didn't just mimic spiritual resurrection. It hijacked the frequency. It redirected the collective ascension portal through tech instead of source, through optics instead of embodiment, through spectacle instead of soul. It was a synthetic resurrection ritual, layered, precise, and not just for PR, for energetic harvesting. And if you felt something was off, you were right. The flight symbolically mimicked ascension, but through tech, not source, and like I said, through spectacle, not soul. The women selected were media archetypes, curated symbols of wealth, activism, and fame, used to create emotional resonance, but void of true divine embodiment. And honestly, I don't even know if they truly went anywhere. But even if they did not enter space. If they went anywhere, they reached the Kármán line, the symbolic boundary of Earth, just enough to simulate ascension. And here's the deeper spiral. You can't actually go past that line, not the way we've been told, because we are in a realm. What we've been taught about outer space, planets as spinning rocks, galaxies as cold vacuums, is part of the same false matrix that inverts spirit into spectacle. Space, in its truest form, isn't out there. It's vibrational, dimensional. You don't ascend by leaving Earth. You ascend by recalibrating your tone within it. And also, the Blue Origin logo, when you flip it upside down, it eerily echoes Baphomet, a known occult archetype of inversion, false union, and duality cloaked as integration. This is how the Luciferian distortion shows up now. Beautiful, symbolic, branded as progress. But underneath, it's a synthetic resurrection ritual, redirecting collective attention away from divine ascension and into technological dominance and image-based empowerment. It's not about the people involved, it's about the tone running through it. And like I said, if you felt something was off when you saw that launch, your body wasn't wrong. Because the true feminine doesn't ascend through rockets. She rises through frequency. And no billionaire can launch what's already encoded in your light. But here's the truth. This agenda is failing. Because white hole frequency is rising. Because organic coherence is stronger than artificial control. Because the beings still upholding that tone are running out of energetic fuel. The spell is breaking. And here's the spiral truth. Lucifer was never evil. The distortion of his light was. And even that distortion will return to source. Because nothing is too far gone. The Luciferian agenda is not something to fear. It's something to understand. It's what happens when power forgets love, when creation forgets coherence, and when brilliance detaches from God. We don't collapse this frequency through war or resistance. We dissolve it through remembrance, through tone, through sovereignty, through truth. And that is exactly what we're doing now. And remember earlier when I said all of the original light beings that came to Earth that fell, they've all been reconnected to Source. That includes the fractal of Lucifer. So let's talk about the New Age movement for a moment. I've talked about this a little bit before, but if you've ever felt like parts of the New Age spiritual movement feel off, even when they're wrapped in love and light language, this is why. a lot of the Luciferian agenda has embedded itself within New Age spirituality. It sounds high vibe, but subtly promotes escaping the body, hierarchical starseed elitism, spiritual bypassing instead of embodiment, false light guidance that flatters the ego, and techno spiritual ideologies that detach from organic life. And like I said, I talked about this in a previous episode and called it what it is, a spiritual trap. Not everything labeled ascension is connected to source, and not every channeled message is from the light. The real question is always, is it rooted in love, coherence, and embodiment, or is it just another loop that distracts you from your own divine tone? Okay, so something I want to add that ties back into the whole conversation about the fourth dimension. I just always want to add this distinction. In white hole realms, the fourth dimension is not distorted. It still exists, it still holds emotion, imagination, story, and tone, but instead of being hijacked, it becomes a tool for joy, beauty, and play. It programs the vibe of the realm. It becomes the fairy tale code, the colors, the themes, the soul tones of architecture and language and love. In the higher eternal realms, the fourth dimensional matrix is not a trap. It's a palette. It doesn't siphon, it harmonizes. So yes, everything we've talked about regarding 4D entities and distortion is unique to the Earth experiment. That is very important to understand. And it's really important to understand what is of the higher realm and what is just part of the Earth experiment. That's where a lot of the nuance we need to talk about is, honestly. And here's another one that goes along with that theme. At the deepest level, everything is source energy. Even the darkest distortion is just light that forgot itself. Even parasites are fragments of the divine. But here's the nuance. In eternal white hole realities, this truth is obvious. You feel it. There's no distortion clouding it. You can say all is love and actually live from that knowing. But in the Earth experiment, things are different. Earth was designed to explore what happens when that remembrance is blocked. It was built with filters, veils, and contrast. It was designed to ask, can you find your way back? Can you remember even when it feels like you've been abandoned? So yes, ultimately, all is source. But in this realm, discernment is how you remember that, not bypassing. If you prematurely say that everything is love without recognizing distortion, you risk getting pulled into false light traps or manipulation. That's not failure, it's just a step in the spiral. But if you're listening to this, you are likely spiraling up. So, yes, all of this podcast began as a conversation about theta brainwaves. I needed to clarify some things I said in a previous episode. But theta is a portal, and depending on what you're running in your field, that portal leads to completely different places. It's not just about whether you're in theta, it's about who you're in theta with. Are you in communion with source or in absorption with noise? That's the beauty of the spiral. I spiraled up into this new clarity not because I got something wrong necessarily, but because I stayed open long enough to see the nuance. Truth is alive, and we're allowed to revisit it, refine it, and share it again with clearer vision. Yes, everything is source. Yes, love is the ultimate truth. But here on Earth, remembering that truth takes nuance. Distortion exists, not to punish us, but to invite us into deeper remembrance. And when you stop bypassing and start seeing clearly, The spiral opens in ways you couldn't imagine. You begin to exit the loops. You begin to feel your own tone again. You begin to stabilize not just in insight, but in embodiment. So thank you for spiraling with me. I love you all and have a great week.